2 weeks, that's all the Cincinnati Bengals front office has left before training camp opens. And sitting on their desk right now is a decision that nobody in the national media is talking about, a decision that could quietly determine whether this Super Bowl caliber roster actually gets to January in one piece, or whether we're all back here in December talking about what could have been. Dre here from Dre Talk Sports, and I need you locked in for this one, because everybody and their mother has spent this entire offseason talking about Dexter Lawrence and Jonathan Allen and this defensive tackle room that's about to be an absolute problem for opposing offenses. And look, they're right to talk about it. That defensive overhaul has been the story of the Bengals' summer, and rightfully so. But while the whole fan base has been staring at the defensive line with stars in their eyes, there are 3 roster spots quietly sitting there with question marks next to them. 3 spots that could become the difference between a championship parade and another gut punch season. And I am going to walk you through exactly where I think this front office needs to be making phone calls right now before camp opens, before it's too late. Let's start with the one that honestly worries me the most, because it doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves: offensive tackle depth. And I want to be crystal clear right off the top, I am not worried about the starting 5. Orlando Brown at left tackle, Amarius Mims at right tackle, those guys are locked in, they're good. This offensive line is fully intact from a year ago, and it should be one of the best units in football. That is not the problem. The problem is what happens the moment one of those 2 tackles goes down for even a couple of weeks. Behind Brown and Mims right now, you're looking at Cody Ford and Jalen Rivers as your primary depth, and neither of those guys has proven on tape over a real stretch of meaningful snaps that he can hold up as a starting NFL tackle against a legitimate pass rush. That's not a knock on either guy as people or as backups. That's just the honest read on the depth chart. And here's the thing about tackle depth specifically: more than almost any other position on the field, you don't get to wait until week 6 to figure it out. By the time an injury happens, it's too late to build chemistry, too late to get reps, too late to do anything but hope. So who do you call? Here's where I want to throw a name into the conversation that hasn't gotten nearly enough shine around Cincinnati: Taylor Decker. Now stay with me here, because on the surface you might say, why would a guy who spent a decade as the starting left tackle in Detroit want to come to Cincinnati and be a swing tackle? Fair question, and here's the situation. Decker was actually granted his release from the Lions this offseason after the 2 sides couldn't work out a pay cut the team was asking for, which tells you 2 things. 1, he's probably going to come at a discount relative to his track record because his market has cooled after a rough final year in Detroit. And 2, he's still motivated to prove he can play, not just collect a farewell paycheck somewhere. Now, I'll be straight with you on the tape, because I'm not going to sell you a story that isn't true. 2025 wasn't Decker's best season. His pass block win rate dipped to 89.3%, the second lowest mark of his entire career, and by Pro Football Focus's own numbers, he still allowed a couple of sacks across the year while grading out around the 40th best tackle in the league. That's not superstar production. But here's the thing. You are not signing Taylor Decker to be your long-term left tackle answer. You already have that answer. His name is Orlando Brown. You're signing Decker to walk in, sit behind 2 younger, better starters, and be ready on a moment's notice to step in and not get your franchise quarterback murdered if something goes wrong. Even in a down year by his own standards, that's still a former longtime starter with real professional pedigree, which is a whole different animal than throwing an unproven camp body into a playoff atmosphere road game. He's turning 33 next month, sure, and long-term that's a fair concern. But for a 1-year, prove-it-both-ways insurance policy, that's exactly the kind of low-drama, high-value move championship rosters make in July. And I genuinely do not understand why more people around this team aren't talking about it. All right, that's tackle. Now let's talk about the other spot that's quietly been bugging me since the offseason started: linebacker depth behind the 2 young starters. And I want to be careful here, because I am not saying Barrett Carter and Demetrius Knight Jr. aren't good. They're both back for year 2 after strong rookie campaigns. And if you go back and watch the tape, both of those guys flashed real, legitimate playmaking ability as rookies, over 100 tackles apiece, and Knight added 3 sacks, a forced fumble, and 2 picks in the process. I like these 2 young guys a lot. My concern isn't the starters, it's what happens behind them. Right now, the depth chart behind Carter and Knight is a collection of role players and special teamers, guys like Oren Burks, who's more of a steady veteran presence than an every-down difference maker. If either young linebacker goes down, or even just needs a breather during a long physical season, this room does not currently have a fully proven answer. And here's the name I think this front office should seriously be exploring, even though I know exactly what half of you are about to say in the comments. Bobby Wagner. Now hear me out before you type anything, because I already know the instinct is to say he's washed, he's 36, he's not walking into anybody's building and being the guy anymore. Fair. But go look at what Bobby Wagner actually did in Washington last season instead of just going off vibes and reputation. 162 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 4.5 sacks. His tackles per game average ranked 6th in the entire NFL, and by advanced linebacker grading, he finished 5th among every linebacker in football. That is not a washed player. That is a future first ballot Hall of Famer who is still right now performing like a top 5 guy at his position, and he remains unsigned heading into the summer. Now, I know there's a version of this conversation where people say, well, doesn't Wagner want to run a defense? Doesn't he want the green dot? Isn't that going to step on Barrett Carter's toes as the guy this coaching staff has clearly built around as their long-term leader? And look, that's a fair conversation to have with his camp, but I don't think it has to be a deal breaker. You don't need to hand him the defensive command to get the value here. Bring him in as a rotational piece and a mentor. Let Carter keep wearing the green dot and running the show as the guy this organization is clearly building its long-term identity around, and let Wagner be exactly what a future Hall of Famer in year 14 should be at this stage. A stabilizing presence who raises everybody else's floor just by being in the room and on the field in critical spots. You're not paying market rate for a 30-year-old 3-down guy here either. This is exactly the kind of value, prove it, raise your floor signing that plugs the hole sitting right there on this depth chart if you're being honest about it. Now here's where I really want your attention, because this next one is the spiciest of the 3, and it's a name that should make every single Bengals fan sit up straight. Joe Mixon. Yes, that Joe Mixon, drafted by this very franchise in the 2nd round back in 2017. The same guy who spent 7 seasons carrying the load in this backfield through some of the leanest years this fan base has ever had to endure before Cincinnati moved on from him and shipped him out to Houston in a trade back in March of 2024. And in year 1 with the Texans, Mixon balled out. 1,016 yards on the ground, 11 touchdowns, over 300 receiving yards, 12 total scores, and a Pro Bowl selection to go with it. He was the engine of that Houston offense in 2024. Then 2025 happened, and it was an absolute nightmare, a mysterious, complicated foot and ankle injury that Texans general manager Nick Caserio himself called a freak thing, an injury so strange and stubborn that it wiped out Mixon's entire season before he ever took a single regular season snap. Houston eventually released him back in March of this year with a failed physical non-football injury designation, clearing $8 million in cap space in the process. And as of right now, with training camps about to open across the league, Joe Mixon remains unsigned. 30 years old this month, coming off a full year away from football, rehabbing a foot, and sitting there on the open market with nobody willing to commit real money to him yet. That's exactly why this makes sense for Cincinnati, and exactly why nobody's talking about it. You are not asking Joe Mixon to walk in and be your workhorse again. That job belongs to Chase Brown, and it should back-to-back 1,000-yard scrimmage seasons, a franchise record season catching passes out of the backfield last year, and now entering a contract year where he's got every incentive in the world to have the best season of his career. I love Chase Brown as the lead back here, full stop. But look at the room behind him honestly for a second. Samaj Perine is a fine complementary piece in a limited role. After him, you're looking at names like Taj Brooks, who didn't show a whole lot in his rookie season, and a mix of camp bodies who haven't proven anything meaningful at this level yet. If Chase Brown goes down for any real length of time, and running backs, more than almost any position on this roster, take a beating over the course of a full season, this offense does not currently have a proven bell cow answer sitting behind him. That's a real problem for a team that's supposed to be built for a genuine championship push, and bringing Joe Mixon back isn't just a sound football decision, and this is where the tabloid drama really writes itself. It's a full-blown redemption arc sitting right there waiting to happen. A guy who gave this franchise 7 years of his career, who was here through some brutal stretches of Bengals football, coming back on a modest prove-it deal into a locker room stacked with more talent than it's had in a decade, with a real, meaningful role available if Chase Brown needs a breather or, worst case, goes down entirely. Can you imagine the reaction in that stadium the first time Mixon takes a handoff back in stripes? I get chills just thinking about the storyline. And look, I have to be honest with you about the risk here too, because that's what separates this channel from the hype accounts. This is not a risk-free move. Mixon is 30 years old. He missed an entire season with an injury that even his own general manager in Houston called mysterious and complicated. There is real uncertainty about whether his foot and ankle hold up under an NFL workload again. This is not a sure thing, but that's exactly why he's still unsigned in July and exactly why he'd come at a bargain price for a team that just needs a proven, well-conditioned veteran presence behind an ascending but largely unproven depth chart, not a 3-year commitment. So there you have it. 3 names, 3 real needs, and 3 moves I think this front office needs to be seriously exploring in these final 2 weeks before camp opens. Taylor Decker at tackle to make sure this offensive line doesn't have a cliff behind an excellent starting 5. Bobby Wagner at linebacker to raise the floor of a still developing room without disrupting the leadership structure this staff has clearly built around Barrett Carter. And Joe Mixon at running back in what might be the most emotionally charged move of the entire offseason, giving this offense a proven answer behind Chase Brown while writing one of the more compelling redemption stories this fan base has seen in years. Now, I already know some of you in the comments are going to say, Dre, they don't need any of these guys. The roster's fine as it is. And maybe you're right that none of these are 5-alarm emergencies this exact second. But championship rosters aren't built by only fixing the problems that are already on fire. They're built by identifying the cracks before they become disasters. This organization has done an incredible job this offseason fixing the glaring, obvious holes on defense. Dexter Lawrence, Jonathan Allen, the safety room getting overhauled with real established veterans. That's all been outstanding, aggressive team building, and I've said as much on this channel before. But the margin between a good roster and a truly complete one often comes down to exactly these kinds of quiet depth moves that nobody's discussing in July and everybody's suddenly discussing in December when a starter goes down and the backup either holds the line or costs you a season. And let's talk about why this actually matters more this year than in years past, because the stakes around this roster are different now. This isn't a rebuilding team where a depth injury just means another disappointing year to add to the pile. This is a team that's being talked about as a legitimate AFC contender for the first time in years. The betting market has steadily moved this roster's win total upward all offseason. National writers are calling for deep playoff runs. The defensive overhaul alone has people drawing comparisons to the last time this roster looked this complete, which means the cost of an unaddressed depth crack has never been higher. It's one thing to lose a swing tackle battle in a season you were never going to compete anyway. It's an entirely different, much more painful thing to lose a Super Bowl window because Amarius Mims tweaks something in October and the guy stepping in behind him has never taken a real NFL snap. That's the stakes conversation nobody wants to have in the middle of all this offseason optimism, but it's exactly the conversation this front office needs to be having internally right now, with 2 weeks left on the clock. Here's another layer to this that I think gets lost in all the hype, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Every single one of these 3 names comes with real documented risk attached, and I think that's actually part of why they make sense rather than a reason to avoid them. Taylor Decker is coming off the worst pass blocking season of his career. Bobby Wagner is 36 years old, and there's a legitimate question about locker room fit given the leadership dynamic already established around Barrett Carter. Joe Mixon is 30, coming off a mysterious injury that cost him an entire season, and there's real uncertainty about whether his body holds up. If any of these guys were sure things, they would already be signed on a real contract with a real team, and this conversation wouldn't exist. The entire reason they're still available in July, 2 weeks before camp, is because of that risk. But that's precisely what makes them available at exactly the value price point a team in Cincinnati's position should be targeting for depth pieces. Not your third safety, who's going to start 16 games, but insurance policies who, if the risk pays off, quietly save your season, and if it doesn't, cost you almost nothing, you weren't already planning to spend on replacement-level roster fillers anyway. And that's really the whole point of a video like this one. It's not about panicking over what's wrong with this roster, because honestly, there isn't a lot wrong with it anymore. It's about making sure the 1 or 2 spots that could bite this team in November get addressed while there's still time to do it cheaply, calmly, and without disrupting anything this coaching staff has already built. Bengals fans have earned the right to be optimistic heading into 2026. This roster is loaded, genuinely loaded, in a way this fan base hasn't experienced in years. But loaded rosters still get exposed by a single unlucky injury at the wrong spot on the depth chart, and I would rather this front office spend 2 weeks and a modest amount of cap space closing those gaps now than spend a Tuesday in November explaining to this fan base why they didn't. Let me leave you with one more thought before we wrap this up, because it's the question I keep turning over in my own head every time I look at this roster. What actually separates the teams that go all the way from the teams that look great on paper in July and then quietly fall apart by Thanksgiving? It's rarely the star power at the top of the roster. Every real contender has star power. It's almost always the depth. It's whoever's playing left tackle in Week 11 when the starter's in a walking boot. It's whoever's third on the running back depth chart when your lead back takes a shot he doesn't get up quickly from. It's whoever's stepping into a starting linebacker spot on a Sunday in Pittsburgh when the kid who's been starting all year needs a veteran voice next to him just to get through the week mentally. Teams that go all the way have answers to those questions already sitting on the roster in July. Teams that don't find out the hard way in prime time in front of the whole country exactly how thin they actually were. Right now, honestly, in a couple of these spots, Cincinnati is that second team. The good news is there's still time to fix it, and the names are sitting right there on the open market waiting for a phone call. All right, that's going to do it for this one. 3 names, 3 needs, and a real shot at making this roster completely bulletproof heading into a season that everybody, and I mean everybody, expects to end with a serious playoff run. If you agree with these picks, or if you think I'm completely off base on one of them, get in the comments and tell me, because I read every single one. Do you bring back Joe Mixon? Do you think Bobby Wagner would actually cause problems in that linebacker room? Let me know. And if you are not subscribed to Dre Talk Sports yet, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications because we've got no filter roster breakdowns, insider reports, and deep dive analysis coming all the way through training camp and into the season. Bengals fans, this front office has done almost everything right this offseason. Let's see if they finish the job. Let's go.